A few weeks ago, I was watching the BioShock analysis by Samuel Gronseth for his channel Games as Literature, for the record a channel I highly recommend, when I found something strange. In this nearly hour-long analysis, of which about a third is spent summarizing the game's story in order to dissect its themes, a whopping 13 minutes is spent just on the backstory of Rapture and its inhabitants before the game even begins, a backstory that is mostly found through audio logs you can pick up along the way. As a huge fan of the entire BioShock series, there were plot points and even full characters that were completely new to me, and it's not like I wasn't paying attention or skipping any cutscenes or in-game dialogue. I didn't get up to get a sandwich when I was looking into Andrew Ryan's office, I was just playing the game and I didn't want the pace of this masterpiece to be hindered by sitting and dissecting every single piece of lore I could find. So today we're going to look at BioShock specifically since it is one of the heaviest games for lore, and also one of the few games that functions despite said abundance of lore, without— Hello? Tim, I'm not going to talk about Destiny. That means I would have to buy Destiny. I'll call you later, I'm recording. Lore texts are nothing new, especially when it comes to games with RPG elements. Deus Ex and Tomb Raider are two recent series rife with a sort of supplemental material. For Deus Ex, it's world building, and for Tomb Raider, it's focusing on the character backstories that led them to either be the good guys, the bad guys, or dead long before the story even began guys. From a writing standpoint, especially in the Deus Ex and BioShock examples, finding a way to shoehorn in all this extra information makes a selfish sort of sense. If I was given the Herculean task of writing a video game, especially a game set in these majestic worlds of Rapture or Detroit, I would want to show off all the flavor text necessary to keep this world intact. When writing a fantasy or science fiction story, it's necessary to plan out everything to better inform the world and make it seem real. However, in literature or film, those plans don't become part of the actual text. 99% of the backstory document is built to live solely in the head of the writer. In a game, those documents can be scattered throughout the world for players to interact with, allowing all the hard work the writing team went through to be turned into tangible content and not just a fanciful form of research. I empathize with the desire to put it all into a game, I really do. And in these three examples, as well as larger games like Skyrim, most of the writing in these supplementals isn't bad, at the very least they're up to par with the rest of the game. But as good as they can be, or as well as they illustrate the world, there's one problem. These things are pointless and functionally identical to a pause menu. The world stops and you can go get that sandwich because nothing bad is going to happen while you're looking at a vase. I'm going to bring up a weird example. Recently, the mediocre indie game Minute was released, a top-down Zelda-inspired game that you play a minute at a time before dying and having to go back to whichever home base you've claimed. Early on, you meet a fisherman whose text runs so slowly that in order to hear everything he has to say, your entire minute of playtime will end and you will die. That entire run is devoted exclusively to one character's pointless dialogue. In Minute, it's a funny gag and you get an achievement for it, so the dopamine rush is quite nice. I bring it up because by design this bit lasts around 60 seconds, and this is the only real example of this sort of behavior in the game. This moment is shorter than almost every piece of lore text I've ever encountered, everything else being bogged down by either unnecessary attempts at expanding the world or just the ramblings of a British woman talking about the history of a coin. While those coins or other artifacts in Tomb Raider are particularly annoying because it has text and audio and a small interactive element that kills any pace whatsoever, the interface of the lore isn't the problem, it's the heavy inclusion of the lore in the first place. Tim, I swear to God the video is fine without Destiny, please don't make me play it. I'm making my point, I'm doing a good job, I just don't want to, okay? Bye. It's easiest, at least for me, to talk about lore text inside of well-made games, usually games published by Square Enix or 2K, because it's easiest to differentiate the story from the lore. While BioShock's lore has many branching paths and interconnected characters, the actual story of the game is about a man being used as a puppet to take down a Randian dystopia and then rebelling against the puppet master that brought him here. The core story of BioShock at its simplest has no interest in the creation of the Little Sisters, or the life of Andrew Ryan, or the rise of Frank Fontaine that brought Rapture to the ground. Of the sea. I'm keeping the line, who gives a shit? While all of those facts help give context to the world, and context is nice, I can't shake the feeling that the reason BioShock is so beloved by many players, including myself, is that most of us didn't stand still and listen to the tidal wave of audio logs strewn throughout. So, the next time you're playing one of the bigger games of any given year, remember that praising a story and praising the world are two very different things, and don't let writers pull the wool over your eyes and pass off half-decent factoids as organic, decent storytelling when they... Fine. But next time you better let me do a video on something only I really care about, like Dying Light or something. Deal? Let's talk about games as services, especially Destiny, and how they are the worst offenders at pretending that their lore counts as having a plot. I had never played Destiny before now, so I went to a resale store, picked it up on Xbox One for $4, never a good sign, and popped the bastard in. And then it had to download for 3 hours. This isn't relevant to the topic of the video, I'm just mad. In addition to being an infuriating, lazily thrown together mess, Destiny, Bungie's follow-up to its narratively rich and deceptively simple Halo trilogy, is the prime example for a game that confuses lore for story. In the beginning, you wake up, your memories have been wiped because of course they have, you're a member of an elite alien fighting squad because of course you are, and it's up to you, and thousands of identical yous to save the day. Destiny is one of the first huge games as a service, mashing together single-player experiences and MMOs into this Cronenbergian disgrace of game design. About as simple of a description of Destiny and its peers is as follows. A game that you and your friends can play forever, with no finality and no progression narratively or technically so great as to keep someone who's been playing for 1,000 hours from comfortably playing alongside someone who just bought the game. It doesn't appeal to me personally in any way, and I think it's actively regressing towards the video games are just toys with murder and toys are not art mentality that detractors of the genre like the late Roger Ebert lived by. But it's not inherently bad, especially as these plotless games have gotten more complicated and skill-based, becoming closer to digital sports than anything else. A lot of these games as service titles to come out after Destiny, like Tom Clancy's Rainbow Six Siege or Anthem, have found where they toe the line between art and sport much better, with the former gutting any story whatsoever, and the latter actually finding a narrative with characters that drop into raids and loot missions in between the story. Say what you will about either of these games, but they're not confused in their storytelling methods, or lack thereof. Destiny doesn't have a main character, just a guardian referred to as such. This character has no personality, no motives, just a job. This character follows whatever actions are thrown onto the minimap like an angry response to BioShock's claim that we should interrogate and think about why we do the things we do in games. Destiny's guardian does not interrogate anything, just points and shoots. It's the simplest of stories and nearly the entire plot can be described in a single sentence. Destiny then overcomes this with these god-forsaken Grimoire cards. Grimoire cards are the game's lore text, little rewards for completing the game's missions with different stories or facts about the races, technologies, and history that Destiny contains. None of this information is conveyed to the player through the actual game, like the threadbare story is a companion to the Grimoire cards as opposed to the other way around. The characters in these cards have names, faces that aren't player-generated, and a reason for continuing. In simple terms, the people at Bungie actually did their goddamn jobs. I would be interested in playing through the events of some of these Grimoire cards, but Destiny doesn't want that. It wants a fully fledged world complete with a history textbook that is required reading to care about even the slightest bit of what's happening, to be dropped into at any moment with any of the 1,000 combinations of loot, strength, and ability. While Destiny does have the threadbare story I mentioned earlier, it doesn't have a point A to point B progression of its characters. Your character's personality and motivation in moment 1 is the exact same as in moment... well, I guess this game was designed to go off forever, so moment 2012. Your character doesn't grow, so the world doesn't change. It's important to think about the stories being told by games and how those stories are told. If you don't want a story in your game, that's fine. Games are entertainment above all else, and nobody has a wrong preference. Some like art, some like sport, but consumers deserve to get what they're paying for, where if even the most narratively rich and complex games of the century can pull a fast one, it is noticed. And beyond that, if a game like Destiny, with its rich worlds and promises of individual narratives, lies under the cover of lore, that needs to be noticed tenfold. If I go to a bookstore and buy a copy of The Lord of the Rings, and I open it up and am greeted with the Silmarillion, I'm going to be pissed. Because as good as that text is, it's lore and mythos and world building. It's not a story. And it shouldn't be sold as such.